Some of you are not leaving this room.
Last time I was in a lecture hall like this, I was falling asleep and trying to take notes on diagrams.
If you guys yawn, I will take it so personally. Like, I don't have my glasses on, so probably all of you are safe, but you guys.
You said that, now I have to yawn. So.
I'm gonna make meaningful eye contact with only these people.
On that note, I'm Jennifer Wong, and welcome to the 2024 Tucson Festival of Books. The festival organizers thank Clearview Business Solutions and Mesh, Clark, and Rothschild for sponsoring this location, and the Friends of the Festival and James and Sandra Rothschild for sponsoring the upcoming discussion. The panel will end in 1 hour. We'll have 15 to 20 minutes for a Q&A near the end of the session. Make sure to stop by the book sales area and author signing at Sales and Signing Area UA Bookstore tent on the mall after the session. It's a table, they're all in the sun, which we all love.
Oh yeah, guys, I'm doing great. Oh, this is yesterday. My non-signing arm is not, I'm gonna switch to my left hand.
Book sales at the festival help support the cost of the festival and the local literacy programs it funds. You can also help keep this event free and open to everyone by becoming a friend of the festival or a sponsor of the festival. Please stop by the Friends booth or visit our website, TucsonFestivalofBooks.org. And then as we begin, please silence your phones. And then joining us today for the panel, The Draw of Dark Academia, are Törzs, Marr, and Olivie Blake. Now, so I'm going to introduce them with their bios, and then I'll ask each of you for a brief overview of your book. So, Marr writes fiction for adults, teens, and children. Her books have been translated into 30 languages into New York Times and USA Today bestsellers. Remedial Magic is the first of 2 books in a witchy lesbian fantasy romance series, Vibes. If she's not writing, you can find her in a kayak or on a trail somewhere in Arizona with her wife. Olivie Blake is a New York Times best-selling author of many novels, including The Atlas Six and Alone with You in the Ether. As Alexine Farrell-Coleman, she is also the author of the young adult rom-coms My Chemical Romance and 12 Nights.
My mechanical romance.
Right. Oh, did I say chemical?
Yeah. Supposed to make that connection. But legally speaking, I did not write The Black Parade.
She lives in Los Angeles with her husband, Goblin Prince / toddler, and rescue pitbull. Törzs is a writer, teacher, and occasional translator based in Minneapolis. Her debut novel, Ink, Blood, Sister Scribe, was a Sunday Times bestseller and a national indie bestseller, and was selected as a Good Morning America Book Club pick, while her short fiction has been honored with the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Prose, a World Fantasy Award for Short Fiction, and an O. Henry Prize. She received her Master of Fine Arts from the University of Montana, Missoula, and is an enthusiastic member of the Clarion West class of 2017. So, welcome to all of you. And now, who wants to go first? If you want to give us an overview of the book that is propped up in front of you.
I figured out the mic in the last panel. I'm Olivie Blake. I am here for the Atlas series, so this is the 3rd book in my trilogy. It's over now if you've been waiting to binge. Good luck. So the Atlas series is about the Alexandrian Society, the caretakers of lost knowledge from the Library of Alexandria and on throughout history. So it kind of takes the assumption that the Library of Alexandria never burned down, but was contributed to over time by very, very specialized magicians. So the books are very relationship driven. They focus on the class of 6 that has just been invited to compete for initiation. So 6 are invited, only 5 will leave. Those are the stakes. Book 1 is my physics book. There's a lot of not to scare you. It's very slutty physics. Okay? It's just there to establish the vibes. But I did read a lot of Carlo Rovelli, so if that says something to you, then let's talk. Book 2 is my psychology book. Book 3 is the philosophy book, and I was really trying to explore how is it possible to be ethical in a world where it's impossible to be ethical.
Oh, I'm really bad at this part. At the last panel, I said my book was about sisters, blood, ink, and scribe. That was such a good pitch. It is about sisters, blood.
I'm going to pitch her book. It's really good. This is sad. So some things that these books share, there is a deep institutional mistrust. I'm so excited to talk about deep institutional mistrust with you. But yeah, no, it's like, but a much more interesting, detailed sense of world building, more descriptions of pine trees. See, I know what the people want. And you know what? In all of these books, there's some lesbian winning, so that's great. That's great for us. I turned out to not pitch this book. I just really want you to read it.
Yeah, that was a great pitch.
So Remedial Magic was a response to the idea of, how when we get a crisis situation, we get that adrenaline rush. And my premise was, instead of an adrenaline rush, we get, in some cases, magic. And so when people go missing, in some cases, it's because of the obvious things like unhealthy relationships, crime, etc. But in other cases, it's because they have been transported to a magical community college. And the book, in theory, that sounds great. I think magical community college sounds fabulous, but unfortunately in their town of witches, there is an ecological disaster that is also killing witches. So my 6 protagonists, because I do multiple point of view, have to juggle community college classes, a new world, new set of rules, falling in love, and especially the very, very hot Victorian witch that my protagonist is luckily meeting there.
Give it another shot.
Oh God.
Come on.
Thank God, my publicist is not in the room. I was coached on this. You're coached. They try to teach you how to do it.
I wasn't coached. I think it's obvious I wasn't coached.
Okay, my book is about, for generations. Sisters. Oh, the failure is incredible. Who have been raised by their anxious Jewish father to protect a collection of magical books, and then things happen. One of them's in Antarctica, one's in Vermont.
Things do happen. It's
Things
true.
happen, and then there's a wretched British orphan that you don't understand for a while, and then you understand why he's in the book.
He's your next favorite. Just read the book. This is crazy. Come on.
There's also an adorable dog. I just want to
Oh
put
yeah,
that out there.
And a cat.
They don't know.
No, they don't. That's very important to me personally. Thank you for those overviews.
You're
Or
welcome.
pastiches. So I think we're just gonna dive into questions, and the first one is, our panel is the draw of dark academia. So, what was the draw for each of you to this subgenre / aesthetic?
First, can we define what we think dark academia means?
Yeah. What does it mean to each of you?
No, I'm not defining. I don't define.
Okay, to me, a book is not dark academia if it is not a psychological thriller in some sense. Do you agree or disagree?
No.
No.
Agree. I think I agree.
You agree?
I think I agree.
Agree. Okay. You have something to say about the institution. Do not. She's taking notes. She's been taking notes on all our panels. What? Okay. Well, anyway, because first when I wrote this book, dark academia was not a thing. Technically, dark academia began with The Secret History in 1990 or whatever, 1993. But to me, The Secret History was definitely an influence, and it is definitely a psychological thriller, and I was doing the same thing, and I thought that academia was a good place to watch the ego melt down. I thought it was, I like to refer to the theater of academia, that everyone is performing for some reason, for this very fake audience. The academy is just talking to itself, right? It's just 10 people writing papers back and forth. But at the same time, there's this desire, I think, to be part of the elite, for the safety that being accepted by the institution provides. And I think approaching that as a marginalized person is especially charged, because you crave that, but it's almost always exploitation. It's almost always a tokenized situation. And so what does it feel like to be offered limitless power, only to learn that that power is meaningless, that that actually doesn't make you feel like you're safe, like you're accepted, and it doesn't actually lead to, doesn't necessarily lead to goodness. It doesn't lead to, I really wanted to, actually, Alex E. Harrow, also let's, Alex E. Harrow is apparently Emma's doppelganger in a spiritual and physical resemblance. So now I'm like delighted to talk about this here. But Alex once told me that in all of my books, there is a character who is performing the aesthetic of goodness, and that's the character who's going to suffer, which I loved. And I think that's something that fit very well into academia. That's like, let's look at this person who is doing goodness in a very inflexible way. They are creating rules that allow them to feel accepted, and at the same time, they're looking for something they won't get. They're looking to be validated from the outside for something that only comes from the inside. And I think that was something that I really wanted to work with. Ethics were very important to me in writing this.
Maybe you should go next, because I feel like both of you have magic schools, and that is, to me, like a big part of dark academia is the actual school, and my book doesn't.
No,
so
mine's not a school.
aren't they like studying?
No, they're a library. It's closer to yours.
Oh, damn. You know what? I've never read it.
I spent all of yesterday with this person. She has just revealed this to me.
My favorite student just gave it to me as a gift.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're
but-
welcome.
Yeah.
No, it's a secret society. It's similar to yours.
Oh, okay, then I'll go next.
Yeah. It's more like a magical PhD program.
Okay, I think that like one of the draws of that in general is that in academia you have like goal points, so you can tell how you're doing. And as a reader, I am incredibly attracted to goal posts as like you can, like kind of judge, like where characters are going and how they're doing. I'm still like, I feel so bad that I haven't read literally a book everybody has read.
That is false. Also, like half these people hate it.
That's not true. They would never be here
Half of
otherwise.
these people are representing the internet and they hate it.
I'm not on the internet, so I'm fully not on the internet except when I'm looking at recipes. But this book is like not really, like it is, the institution is a library itself. And I feel like libraries, I'm very pro-library, but when I'm thinking about how knowledge gets passed down and how it gets, the archive, like how the archive gets formed and who's in the archive, who's let into the archive, who is the arbiter of that knowledge, like that's where academia gets dark to me. Even though I'm in academia, I like academia. I've had some very light experiences in academia as well, but it gets dark when you start thinking about knowledge as a finite resource and you start thinking about who has told stories, who has put things to paper, who has saved that paper, who has put it into buildings. Then you have to start talking about like privilege and power and colonization and who can access
Who can
it.
see the archive.
Yes, who gets to be in the archive, who sees it, all that stuff. That gets very dark very fast. And then you put magic into it and it's like
I love that, and it's actually part of how I ended up with where I'm at. I'm writing about a magical community college. I come out of academia before writing. I taught university literature. I tried to quit writing a few years ago. I was just burnt out, and so I started teaching in an MFA program. My daughter just finished her PhD. Like, academia is spoken in our house, but I'm very shaped by the idea of exclusivity and ownership of power and who tells the story. And so when I start looking at those things, I went to a college that was an all-boys school until my grade for college, and it was a Benedictine college with labyrinths that we weren't allowed in, and classes we couldn't take because we were female, and we weren't allowed in the monastery where it was cloistered. So I have spent the last 30 years both in academia and thinking about what it means to be there, the privilege to be there. I'm Appalachian poor as my background. So getting to go there included working several jobs, including in the library, and scholarship. So who's telling what right they have to knowledge, to the power, is very much the foundation of this book. So these are the kind of questions that I think we have to ask when we're thinking about any kind of academic setting. I don't think about it in terms of dark academia or any genre. I found out yesterday this is a romantasy. I found out when I was designing this panel that it's dark academia. When I wrote it, I was pretty sure it was a fantasy.
I think romantasy is romance narrative beats with a fantasy world, and I wouldn't say there's too many.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not any of those things. I'm saying that I have given up. This is my 18th anniversary of selling my first book, which has, So when you're looking at that first book has been published as YA, adult, fantasy, romance, depending on which country, which language. I've heard it's urban fantasy, elf punk, and paranormal romance. So I have decided after 18 years that whatever the category is that marketing says it is, I'm okay with that.
So that was actually a great way into my second question. It was that all of your books interact with our real world, which they also have fantasy elements, so sometimes we're set in a world that's different from our own. And then mentioned marginalizations, access to power, institutions, and how did writing about those shape your characters? Because those will invest different kinds of power and privilege into your characters, but also withhold that from them. So how did you approach that in your writing?
For me, this was very much, after 18 years of writing and writing several books that were originally with lesbian protagonists and being told, Melissa, you can't do this and pay your bills. I was suddenly allowed to write lesbian protagonists recently, which was super exciting. And I felt like in some ways that's a macrocosm of what I'm dealing with these characters. This is a world that is queer normative. I have protagonists in this book that are gay, straight, and lesbian. And as the book goes, there's, obviously all races are welcome, all religions are welcome. I have a character who's ace, a character who's non-binary, not because I'm trying to check boxes, but because that's what the world looks like. And for a long time, there's been a question of inclusivity and what that means, not just in the world, but also within the books we're allowed to write. I've had several books that have been pushed back to me, and I've been told I had to change them in order to publish them. And to that end, we're finally at a place where being able to have that level of inclusivity is possible. I think it's always been possible if publishing in Europe would cooperate. Case in point, my second book has 2 gay male protagonists along with a straight female protagonist. And it hit the New York Times. And it hit bestsellers in other countries. So obviously you can in fact have that in a mainstream front list book and hit the list. It's just requires a little bit of battle over the years. Now we're finally at a place that it doesn't require as much battle.
Can you briefly restate the question?
Yeah, so it's all your books interact with the real world and real systems of power and oppression that we have to deal with. And then how did you approach writing about how those invest power or privilege into your characters, or how that's withheld from them?
That's a great question. When it comes to how institution shapes characters, I think it's in part, you always ask, what's the relationship to the institution, or the knowledge base, whether you're talking about academia or a library or what have you, how do the characters relate to knowledge? So when I was thinking about this book in particular, I've said this I think on every panel that I've been at, so I'm sorry if it's repeating itself, but I wanted a magic system that was fully accessible to everybody, but also very selective in who could perform it. So it's book magic, so anybody who can read, even people probably who can't read, can perform the spells, but only a few people can sense the magic and only a few people can write the magic. And then there's a whole other group of people who are the people who control the magic itself. And so thinking about marginalization, or just thinking about how people relate to power, I wanted an example character from each of those 3 relationships to the magic. And so the characters really were shaped by the magic, although the magic came after a lot of the characters, so they sort of shaped each other as I was writing it.
So I wanted to play with scope when I was writing this, and one of my inspirations was Westworld, and the way that when you, like in the first season, it's a Western, and it's just a Western. You just exist in this this one little world, and then every season beyond that, the world expands out and recontextualizes what you first saw. So something that you bought into in the beginning, you have very different feelings about toward the end. And so that was something that I wanted to do. That's the reason I wanted to write a trilogy, where each book allowed you to see a little farther into the world and to understand a little bit more about it. And what I was also working with was the idea of separate agendas. So in these books, for example, there is Atlas's agenda, there's the Alexandrian Society's agenda, and then there's the agenda of the archives, and you don't necessarily realize those are three different things until the characters realize those are three different things. And I built the archives off of generative AI, basically. I don't know that I got to come to any conclusions yet. We did agree yesterday that art doesn't have to make conclusions. You can come to a conclusion about what I've presented you with. But one thing that I was thinking about was that when I was an undergrad, I sat on a committee for admissions, and I helped my department choose who would get the next merit scholarship that I had. And so people would come in, they'd have these just outstanding resumes, their test scores are great, their grades are great, and we had to pick one person, right? And as we were discussing it, they were like, okay, the thing is that you have to consider the return on your investment. So it's not just who is going to succeed here, but who is going to exceed in the real world to then donate back to the university. How does what we produce from here give us something back? How does it generate more income for this institution? And that darkness, I think, stayed with me. Yeah, because it is dark. It is dark. Everything is where does the money come from, and who does it benefit? And who is allowed to access it and why is a very interesting question. And if it doesn't address that, then is it really dark academia, or is it just vibes?
Oh, right, you have your own.
I have this little thing. This, you mentioned the magic and the return on the investment, and I remember all of them being like, what's your research proposal for year 2? And did dark academia influence how you develop that magic? I know you touched a little bit on this. Or did you just feel like, it's the magic system, I want this cool thing, I'll make it work with the rest of my story?
Why are you, she just talked to you?
Oh, I answered it.
You have the
Right,
mic.
yeah.
You have the floor.
That's why I keep handing it to
I
you.
wasn't thinking about dark academia at all. I love the genre though, and I tend to really like dark academia books. I love,
What's your
secret
favorite?
history.
That's the best dark academia.
The Atlas Hicks. I will do once I read it, now that I know how smart
Yeah.
most people are. I do love the secret history a lot, to be honest. I've read it multiple times, so probably the secret history.
Why do you apologize?
Oh, it's so famous. But I really wasn't thinking about dark academia. And then when people started calling it dark academia, I was like, oh, you're just trying to sell it. That's what I said to my publicist. I'm like, you're just throwing this hashtag on it. But I've actually had academics be like, oh, this was dark academia to me, because of the questions of institutional knowledge and all of that. And I'm in academia, so I'm always sort of darkly in.
Just lurking at all times.
Just lurking. And my mom was a community college professor all her life. Thanks for representing.
No, on a side note, I think community college, that background, I taught at one of the major universities, NC State, and then I moved to community college because it is more equal. And so that was definitely, it's been a career focus for me on my academic side. And when I'm thinking about it, it does shift things. But so when I'm looking at the magical system, I'm thinking about it in the way that I have to admit I think about, or I thought about my students back when I taught full time. And part of that is each of us, and this is my personal belief, each of us has something magical, fabulous, uniquely wondrous about us. And if I could spend the evening with each one of you getting to know you, I would find that, because every person is fascinating to me. I was a bartender. It was the best job because they paid me to talk to people, which was fabulous. So when I looked at this, I thought my magic system is based on finding that kernel of uniqueness in each person. And so their magic is taking that kernel and it blossoming. So some people are particularly good at law. Some people are particularly good at creating. There are some people who are particularly good with agriculture. And because this is a closed society, with everybody's unique magic traits, we have a whole and complete world. If any of those traits are taken away, the world falters. And so when I'm looking at a magical system, I'm looking at it as a whole picture. I find world building to be my favorite part of writing, and part of that is because when you look at a world, and when you think about the pieces that are missing, there's some amazing worlds. But then when you look at them and you start examining the flaws, what is their political background? Who's handling the money? Who's fixing the toilets? All of these are essential positions, but so many worlds, when we look at fantastic worlds, are omitting part of that. So I consciously went into this to say that my magical system is suggesting that each one of us has a unique skill, that when magic is added to it, it benefits not just the individual, but the community. And that was sort of the foundation of the magical system.
So one thing that is especially natural about academia for this type of plot is that academia itself sloughs away the unworthy. That the higher you get, you watch people fall away. And there is a natural ranking. There is someone who wins, there's someone who loses. The whole idea of the curve is that some people fail, and they will always fail. And I dropped out of law school. This is relevant. I made this joke earlier. I'm gonna do it again. I only have so many. So law school is made up of the worst people you've ever met. And I include myself in that. But I think there's a reason for it, which is that in order to go to law school, you have to have been the top of every class on your way up, and you just end up being the most obnoxious version of yourself. Like, you know, the other brand of smart people, they go be doctors or whatever. And then there's like you, who is not as good at math and science, but was very good at like talking in front of a class. So like the worst people. And like, you know, and after all that like clawing and competing and ambition, and then you're all put in this room together, and like you can still like, even then I remember that the clickiest place I've ever been was in law school and in like my section, and there was like the cool, and I just sort of watched that happen, and it was just like, how would this, and like I said, I dropped out of law school because I was very frustrated by, I had spent all this time reaching for something I thought would give me power, like something that I thought would allow me to change things, that I could look at the world. I majored in urban planning, and then I didn't become an urban planner because I realized like, oh, I don't want to run community forums for the rest of my life. Like, it's not, like nothing ever gets done. I sat in on like a 3-hour meeting about a speed hump, which is different than a speed bump. And I learned all about it, and I was just like, oh yeah, no, this is not for me. And one of my professors was like, yeah, you're gonna be really bored with this, with the government machine. You don't want to be part of the bureaucracy, go to law school. So I went to law school, and then I worked for the public defender's office, and in 3 years, I had one not guilty verdict. And that man sat in jail, awaiting trial for the entire 3 years that I worked there. And he was not guilty the whole time. When we finally got to trial, it was a bench trial, which means it was just a judge. And he was not guilty in probably an hour. And over the course of those 3 years, his wife left him, his baby grew up, like he lost so much, and I couldn't give that back to him, and I've never, oh no, it's this room. I have never felt so fucking powerless in my life. And I brought that to these books, and this sense that like, yeah, you can be offered limitless power. You can be patted on the head as many times as you like. You can be in the classroom and feel like you have the capability to change things, and people will, you know, the charismatic professor will stand there and tell you like, be the change. And then you face the world and you realize how small you are. And that really humbling experience is kind of the basis of book 3. So like, many people were depressed, and I'm sorry, but that's the world.
Okay, someone's gonna cry in this panel.
I already got weepy.
But on that, like this subgenre aesthetic, it does deal with heavy topics, and like writing a book is lonely. You are sat at your computer for endless hours to be typing away. Did you have any kind of like writing self-care that you did for that, or?
You know, after you've been doing this for a couple decades, you realize that without the self-care, you do what I did, which was burn out and take 3 years off. So yes, all the time. I have a schedule that includes gym days. I used to teach historical sword fighting, so my wife is very patient, and we hit each other with swords.
Can we go outside and do this now?
Next time you're in town, I've got a whole armory. I have to bring it.
Yes!
And no, the number of people I've offered to arm and teach. I actually used to teach sword fighting for writers, so
I started boxing so that I could write fight scenes.
Right, no,
I'm gonna take this class.
Yeah.
Everyone now.
Sorry, we're on the tangent now. Yeah, I started.
I'm in. I got the reflex.
I started it in order to storyboard fight scenes, and discovered that I really like hitting people. Talking about power issues, and it became very quickly exciting to me. I'm 5'2". I am 51 years old. I'm a stroke survivor, and it's really powerful to have they only weigh about 2 pounds, a proper sword, historical, and I can take that long skinny blade of steel, and I can bring people that tower over me to their knees. It does great things for me. So when I moved to Arizona, I taught a class for women at the Mesa Public Library, a free class for any female person that wanted to come. So I had PTSD people, I had divorced people trying to reclaim their lives, and we would walk out of that library and there's 20 women with swords on their shoulder walking out, and it was just glorious. So my self-care is my wife and I hit each other with swords. And my 11-year-old, when he's upset with me, talk about like maybe bad parenting tips, I have taught my 11-year-old sword fighting. So when he's stressed or has a bad day at school, he comes home and he's like, can we get swords? And we discuss what's going on with weapons. And it's brilliant because everyone's anxiety comes out, and then he can sit down and do homework, and I can write a chapter.
That's more.
Damn.
I take baths. I do have a cat. He's in my author photo, and I care for myself by being obsessed with him at all. Thank you for the coos of delight. He is a purebred Siberian because I live with somebody who's really allergic, so we had to get a fancy cat. So yeah, we have this lovely cat. But the truth is, like, when I sold my book, I did 2 things for myself that I had never been able to afford to do, which is I bought a new bathtub to fit my long body, and it's like transcendent. I've never been in a bathtub before. It's only 4 inches longer than our other one, but it's like amazing. And I now have a membership at a Pilates studio. And if you want to talk about Pilates, I would love to talk to you. I've turned into like a weird evangelist about it. But my back pain is gone. It's really chill. You lie on your back, sort of like flopping your arms around, and then you're sore. I really love Pilates. So those are, and then I have a pretty nice life. So when I think about self-care, I'm like, I don't know, I eat nice foods. I see my friends. It's just sort of.
She doesn't have social media, that's part of it.
Oh, I don't have social media. I'm not on the internet. Can't recommend it enough. I'll never do it. I think it's written into my book contract that I will never get social media. I was like, it's a hard line for me, but it does mean that I'm behind on a lot of things. But my friends tell me a lot of things too. So, yeah. But if you ever want to quit social media, you should.
Yeah, I write to keep the horrors at bay. People often ask me, like, how are you so prolific? And I'm like, listen, if I didn't do this, everything would be much darker and worse. I did recently, so I have bipolar, and while I was in law school, I was actually very medicated. And I do think that there's something about specifically lithium maybe that kind of like blocks imagination. Because the first thing that happened when I couldn't get my lithium prescription refilled is that I couldn't sleep, and I stayed up all night and I wrote fan fiction on the internet. And I was just like, this is what I'm doing. This is who I am now. I'm Olivie Blake on fanfiction.net. Now, this is me now. Oh yeah, I'm also on AO3. Yeah, you can find all my stuff there. 4 million words of fan fiction. That's how mentally ill I am. And yeah, and it's actually, the idea that I can be a working artist is crazy. Like, that, I would still be doing this at exactly this pace. I just wouldn't be talking to you, or I would, but it wouldn't mean anything to you. I'd have no credibility to stand on. So anyway, thank you for being here, so that I can be healthy and alive.
No bats.
Oh no, God, no.
So swordplay, swords, hello. That was amazing. But and you said you started it for storyboarding. Was there, for each novel, I guess you have to do some kind of research. Did you have a favorite tidbit of research that you found that maybe made it into the novel or maybe didn't, and that's heartbreaking?
I mean, if we look at sword fighting, there's an amazing move where you take your sword, and because of the way you are, you slam it into someone's mouth. You take the hilt and you put it in their mouth. In the medieval manuals, the tattoo on my arm is from the first sword fighting manual. I'm sorry, you got me on a geek note. And it's called the teeth remover. And when you do this, you're taking the pommel, which is kind of like a fist, and you're slamming it into your opponent's mouth. And every time I write a sword fighting scene, I think about that. I think about the people, that catch up in traffic or say sexist things or make homophobic comments. In every one of those spaces, each week we would call, in my sword fighting class, we would call my sword dummies, because I had 3 of them, and they would have different names based on who had the most heinous moment of the week. So that fist in the face with a metal sword end is in as many books as I can put it.
Well, I used to be a competitive fencer, and I've always been trying to work fencing into a book. Yeah, but I was like young and not good at it. Apparently I didn't have the kill instinct. Yeah, my tail is always wagging, is my friend's joke. I'm like, I have the opposite of resting bitch face. That's a problem. Yeah, but I did a lot of research and don't remember what I put in and what I didn't. I don't even remember anymore, but someday I'll have a lot of facts about loons.
So in the back of the Atlas Complex is what's called related reading, and this is everything that I remember reading. Again, so I have to remind you, if you don't know who I am, I self-published the first book because I didn't think anyone would want it. And now we're here, so like, surprise! And so I wasn't keeping careful track, but I read a bunch of these books. These are the ones that I remember reading, and they're all here. This is academia, I gave you a reading list. So if you want to prepare, there's the syllabus. But I've never cut a darling in my life. I never cut jokes, and I never cut like weird little interests. Part of this is because like I went viral, and so my publisher can't tell me no. Just so you know. So like in Alone with You in the Ether, I got like really weirdly obsessed with bees. And in this book, or in these books, it was hexagons and quantum theory. In one of the books I'm writing now, it's pigeon breeding. In the next season of Clara and the Devil, there's a whole jellyfish motif. I enjoy reading widely and then incorporating all of those things by force. Like everyone is going to know about them now.
I mean, I think that's fairly normal for writers, though. I mean, suddenly those weird little rabbit holes we go down in are research.
Yeah,
It's
work.
It's great.
Writing at all times.
I will also say that writing is a great excuse to research things that you're interested in, and it can get you into places, which is something that I've now learned. If I say that I'm writing a novel, I sometimes just lie about what it's about. I'll be like, I'm writing a novel about, I just tried to scam Impossible Pork, which has been released only in Singapore and Hong Kong. Again, I'm only on the internet when I'm like reading about food, but I do a lot of Szechuan cooking, so I was like, oh my god, I gotta get this pork. And I emailed them and was like, hi, I'm an internationally best-selling author writing a book about the pork industry. Wouldn't send it to me, so I had to buy 14 pounds of it wholesale. But all that to say, like, shoot your shot.
I was also going to say, so yesterday there was an author mixer, and this is an especially like fun festival because it's such a wide variety of authors, and we all get put together in a room. And at some point, we were talking to a journalist who was describing something to us about the heat in Arizona and the uptick in violence. What was his name? Tom, and then last name Z. It looks like a great book though. It felt, maybe I'm pitching this to myself as like a little bit of Bill Bryson and Joan Didion like essay kind of situation, travel essays, I guess. Whatever. The point is, as he was talking, I could see all the other authors around me being like, I'm gonna use this. It was like a really like carnivorous moment where it was like, this is mine now.
It's impossible to explain that to people when they're like, where do you get your ideas? I'm like, everywhere. Like every single person you meet when you start, whether it's the violence in Arizona, which is a brilliant concept.
Right?
Or let's talk
There's
about
something
bees.
so inherently magical about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna write a Death's book now. It's super inauthentic.
When you come here for research, I'll give you
Right?
sword lessons.
Swords! Salt.
It's all worked out.
It's been a great day for me.
So one final question before we move into Q&A, and it was, Emma, when I was reading your book, Joanna describes the novels her father reads as having a very different kind of power from the books of magic. So I want to know if there's a novel for all of you that had that special power for you and has like really stuck with you through the years.
See, I told you gotta have an answer for this.
I'm bad at having answers for like almost everything, but I mean, there's like, I feel like every part of my life has had that book where I'm like, oh, in this part of my life, this book is holding an incredible amount of power for me right now. I will say that one book that I read as a young person, I think I was probably 10, and I reread it all the time, and love it, and just feel so deeply about it. I'm curious if any of you have read it, is Wise Child by Monica Furlong. Anyone? Wise Child and Juniper? They were written in like, I think about 1989 by a former nun, and they're about the moment in like Celtic history, it's either Wales or like Ireland or Scotland, I'm not sure, when Christianity is coming in and like pushing out the like indigenous religions, and it is a stunning book, Wise Child, and I like can get myself to tears just thinking about it sometimes.
Do it.
But it's so beautiful, and every time I read it I'm like, oh wow, this is why I am who I am, because I read this book 400 times when I was 10 years old, and it shaped my soul in like such specific ways. That's when I usually start crying.
I'm gonna say 3 books. So, foundational book for me, I Capture the Castle by Jody Smith. That book is like, I've reread it many times. I have very different feelings about it as an adult than I did as a teenager. Like my teenage copies got like tears and annotations that are like, yeah, this is how love feels. Girl, you don't know how love feels. But it's still just an incredible book. And then the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante, my favorite books. It's another one I reread every year on my birthday. I think that's like, at the best of times, it's the kind of story I'm telling, something that's very large in scope at the same time that it's very small. And White Teeth by Zadie Smith. Jody Smith and Zadie Smith. Yeah. White Teeth is like also what I think I'm doing at the best of times. That like what is now like coined hysterical realism, that's really just like theater of the absurd playing out. Like that's something that I'm approximating all the time, and my editor is like, does this make sense? And I'm like, Lindsay, it's not supposed to. Like the closest that I have, of my books, the closest there is Masters of Death. The next book that I have, well, not the next book, oh Jesus. Next year, a book called Gifted and Talented is coming out that is a very theater of the absurd. And it has like that White Teeth vibe, hopefully. I'm not saying I'm Zadie Smith, she's like so cool. But yeah, like that I think for me is at the best of times, that's what I'm trying to do.
I also love those 3 books.
Thank you.
So my childhood childhood influence would have been either, my grandmother was born in 1906, and she had a book that her father had given her, which was old versions of fairy tales. And as someone that pretty much writes fairy tale and folklore-based fiction, that one, it's not a book that I can recommend. There's not like a proper title. It was a gift that he gave her that had been her I mean, it was just like, it's this falling apart book that I've been toting around my whole life. And then Alice in Wonderland, which as an adult, especially when I went into literature, I can see problems with, but as a child, I was forever finding hills to throw myself off of, because Alice did that and found a fantasy world where she could take power, and that sounded great to me. So
Part of the desire in dark academia, you're gonna
Yeah.
throw yourself off a hill.
Yes.
Just to see.
yes, just to see what happens.
If the world will open for you.
And you can take power, and this could be cool. And then as I got older and went through the degrees, I ended up doing my graduate work on William Faulkner. And what I look at my writing, the two things that I took from Faulkner were that when you're reading a book, you should forget that you're reading a book. You should feel the moment with all your senses. You should be there. To the point that my professor in graduate school walked me around campus so I could get a proper smell of wisteria, because I was an Appalachian girl and didn't know what that smelled like. And also that no story is contained by one voice. Every story, every truth happens between voices. So I almost always write multiple point of view, because the truth of an event is what happens between the versions of truth told by all the characters. Ideally, who all want different things. So when I look at what I'm trying to do with writing, it's very much trying to find that space between voices.
Yeah, I don't need that, but.
Get that away from this.
We just keep passing it. I don't like that.
Well, thank you for all of those answers, and now we're going to open it up to the audience. Down in front.
Oh, no.
No, this one's specifically for Melissa. For those of us who may or may not live in Tucson and may or may not want to get some sword lessons, well, aside from hunting you down, which might be a little bit boundary crossing, since I'm a fan of your work, where would you suggest I go looking for sword lessons in town?
I actually know this. If you look on the HEMA Alliance, HEMA, it's Historical European Martial Arts, there is a local group in town that you can join, and they have competitions, they have lessons. Last I heard from them, they were teaching in a warehouse here in Tucson, because when I first moved here from DC, I would drive down to Tucson to meet them. It's a little far, so I decided to open my own class. And so I would fly back to DC to see my coach, and then from there, I ended up teaching. But down here, there is a group. Look for, the webpage is HEMA Alliance.
Oh, yeah, up here.
I had a question. How do you write really deep, intricate worlds with political systems and magic and hierarchies and all that stuff without either overshadowing the characters and their own ambitions, but also not undercutting the world? How do you balance it?
I'm going to repeat it because it's a little quiet, so I just want everyone to hear it. It's like, how do you write intricate world systems, hierarchies of power without overshadowing your characters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will say that is actually where I start a book, is once I figure out the world, the political system, the structure, I end up picking people who the structure is either oppressing or supporting. And then ideally, I'm having people that have opposite relationships with the structure, and then that way they have opposite goals, and that creates tension, which creates a book that is page turning. So starting with the structure, who does this most inconvenience and who does this most uphold? But once you identify those people, it's much easier to say, what kind of person is this? And the character, for me, is built out of the structure.
Yeah, well, we live in a world with complex political systems, and many worlds are contained within our so-called real world. So, when you read literary fiction, I think there's also a lot of world building that gets done that you kind of don't think about or see, especially if you are reading a book set in a place that you've never visited, for example. You will have to invest more as a reader to understanding the world that you're entering into. And what happens with that is that a lot of writers who are not from like Western publishing have to do extra world building if they're trying to speak to like a westernized audience. So I think like just to eradicate the idea that like we live in a real world, there's no such thing as the real world. So when I write like in what people call the real world, in that it's like our world but with magic, but it's not, there is no our world. So it's only the world of the characters. It's only how the characters relate to the structures and the political systems of the world that they're in. And I think that's not so different from like when you create an entire secondary world, which I have never done because it does seem hard, so I guess it's a little bit different. But I think that it's like all character, like how does the character relate, kind of what you were saying as well.
I would like to say that my world building is closer, what feels closer to me to sci-fi than fantasy, because I'm not enforcing rules, I'm like turning the dial on one thing. So like these books are kind of climate fiction, and then I said, okay, we solved climate change with magic that's built into the institution, and here's everything that changed from there. As opposed to like, I would say yours is a fantasy world with fantasy rules, that like things work a certain way. But I feel like these are very good craft answers and a commercial answer in order to publish a book. The reason that you're supposed to have comps when you query is because there is no correct world building. So what you have to do is find books that do what you like and see how they built that. Because there is no such thing as the objective, solid world building. There's no like correct answer to your question. It's what do you like and what do people who would like your book like? And so that's something that you determine as a matter of taste, and that is the importance of reading other books, specifically published in the last 5 years, so that publishing knows how to sell them.
I'm gonna try to make all of you cry. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I'm up for it.
I think it's relevant no matter what, but given that all your books are talking about who has access and that, I'm curious if you want to say anything about banned books and maybe recommend a banned or challenged book.
Okay, so
Sorry.
this question is about banned books, and do you have one you'd like to recommend or a comment for it?
I have comments or
I was gonna say that I don't know what books are banned, because I was just thinking of, have you guys listened to Suyi yet? He has this great thing where he says, I'm too educated for this conversation. And that's how I feel about banned books. Like, I'm just like, this is like, I'm too educated for this conversation. I'm reading all the books. Anyway, do you have a better answer?
No, not better, just I'm recently having a number of my books being banned and challenged and removed from schools. So last month I had conversations with an NPR affiliate who contacted me to tell me that my second book, Ink Exchange, which is, it's a fairy series, Wicked Lovely's fairy series, it's the second book. The protagonist is a rape survivor. And honestly, I wrote it because I am a rape survivor. Quite honestly, that's why I had to adopt children. Adoption is a beautiful thing. But for me, it was that or no children, because I was destroyed internally. So I wrote that book, and I'm not going to cry, but I wrote that book from the perspective of wanting to talk about what happens after rape. We see rape used in fiction all the time as character building, but we don't talk about what happens after. And it isn't about building my character, it's about surviving. And I have built an amazing life, and I did that because I'm a survivor, not because of something someone did to me. So to see that book in particular banned pisses me the fuck off. Yes. 18 years since that, well 17 years since that book came out, and I still hear from readers every single month telling me that that book was there for them. And having these people, we'll call them people, monsters, taking books away from children, they give them the strength and the feeling of not being alone, whether it's about diversity or sexual assault or any other topic, is just heinous. So I'm feeling very invested in this because my books are being pulled off shelves across the country right now. And so, yeah, not cool. I don't have an answer, but I do have a statement, but it's less polite than the one I just said, so.
was, I just wanted to ask about editing. You know, to a certain extent, I think I can
What genre?
understand. I'm mostly writing fantasy, but
Like epic fantasy?
yeah, somewhere in there. I don't know. I bounce around a bit, but
I just had to get a scale for that 150,000. If you
Yes.
said romance, I'd be like, girl, get out of here.
understandable. I just wanted to ask. I can generally understand like what needs to be cut, but do you have any advice, any tips on trying to get a feel for this really should stay versus this really needs to go?
You need another person.
Okay.
You need more input. Yeah, because like I told you, I joke I've never cut a darling. That's not true. People have forced me to cut things. But I think it is really important. When you finish your first draft, when I finish a first draft, I'm a pantser. I am just pantsing my whole way through there. By the end of the first draft, I'm like, oh, that's what the book was about. And I force myself to stop and think, okay, well, now that I know what the book was, what do I need to do to strengthen that story to make it so that other people now will understand that story? And so, you know, some of that I can do on my own. I create a list of like, here's all the things that need to happen in order for it to be stronger. I do all those things, and then I go back to the beginning, read it a second time. But after that point, like, you do need someone else's opinion, because someone else will be able to tell you what's missing. And it doesn't even need to be like another writer. It needs to be someone you think is a good faith audience member. Like someone who is genuinely going to enjoy your book. You give them the book, they read it, and they will tell you. My best example is that when I wrote the Atlas 6, I gave it to my husband after. And I was like, you know, like, it's as tight as I know how to make it. What do you think? And he said, it's really good, except for there's no magic in the middle. Like, there's a whole section where nobody does any magic, and is this not a magic book? He's not a fantasy reader. and I was like, oh, okay. And so I wrote the scene where Nico and Olivie reinforce the house's plumbing. And my editor loved that. Like, I've had two editors who both, like, they think that's the best and most pivotal scene in the book. And that's something that I only got because he was like, this little thing is missing. So you do need another perspective. But you just have to make sure it's someone, like, not even that they have expertise, but just that they are there for the experience and are going to tell you in a way that's valuable. Ditto.
I'll tell you what I tell my MFA students. Look at each chapter. It should advance at least 2 of 3 traits: world, plot, and character. If it isn't advancing 2 of those, is this a necessary chapter? Because every chapter has to do the work. And as part of figuring that out, picture your movie trailer. Your book's written, it's been optioned, it's gonna be on the screen. What are the scenes that are gonna be in the trailer that are gonna make people see it? And those are the kind of scenes that you wanna focus on. Not that talking doesn't matter, not that eating, all those other things that we do don't matter, but you wanna make sure you're doing the work in each chapter. If it's not doing at least 2 of those 3 aspects of writing, then I question whether or not it should be in that space. World, character, plot.
Okay.
So I actually use a whole chart and do that.
I was just going to add, this is just a guess here, but for a debut fantasy novel, if you're at 150,000 now, I think you need to cut to 120,000 or less, and I think that's an arc. So it might be a character, but it's at least an arc.
I will add one more thing too, which is that I love cutting. I find it so empowering to be like, this is not serving me anymore. I'm gonna hack it apart and put it away. And I think that if you can learn to love that feeling of being like, I know this well enough to know that I don't need this anymore. I can do something else. It can be really fun.
You can also save it for the next book.
And save it, yeah.
Okay. On that note, that's it for today's panel.
Oh, bye.
Last thing, just a special thank you to our authors for their participation today, and a thank you to all the readers, all of you for attending. And then the book sales area and author signings is at the sales and signing area. UA books are 10 on the wall in the sun. So